keeping things on a calm note. Light winds for most of us. There's a bit of a breeze out towards the west at times, but stuck underneath this high-pressure system remains quite a lot of cloud. So for many of us, it's going to be grey skies throughout much of the day. We could see the odd spot of drizzle in places, particularly around some western coastal districts or over the hills as well, quite misty and murky. There will be, though, some sunnier spots for the likes of northern Scotland, so here we'll see the best of the brightness during today. But for many of us, those temperatures will be around average for the time of year, between 12 and 14 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening, if you do have any bonfire night celebrations tonight, it should stay largely dry, but again, I can't rule out the odd spot of drizzle to watch out for, particularly across those western areas. But otherwise, widespread blanket of cloud for much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Again, the best of those clearer spells overnight are going to be reserved for northern areas of Scotland, where you've got the best chance of seeing some starry skies. Because, though, the clear spells are here, this is where we'll see temperatures drop off a little bit more as we head into the second half of the night. So we could see a touch of patchy frost around first thing on Monday morning for northern Scotland, but elsewhere temperatures will be holding up more in single-figure marks generally. A little bit colder than where we have been over recent nights, but certainly 7 to 9 degrees Celsius for most. As we head into Monday, for many of us, it is a very similar picture with widespread grey skies and remaining fairly drab and gloomy. But a slight change in wind direction could provide a little bit more in the way of brightness to arrive into the far southeast, but also for the likes of Western Wales, Northern Ireland and parts of Western Scotland as well. May eventually see the sunshine poking through during the latter stages of the day. Temperatures again around that 12 to 14 degrees Celsius mark, but as we head into the middle part of the week, whilst the cloud is going to remain, temperatures should climb up a little bit more, a bit milder.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catherine Richards and Jake Singleton-Hill featured on the reality show Love is Blind.
Well, Catherine and Jake are joining us now in the studio for Saturday Morning Live. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is perhaps not the end result that people might have thought that they'd be seeing at this point, because you were both on the show, but you didn't fall in love in the pods, did you?
No, we didn't. I rejected him.
You guys look great together.
Yeah.
Very happy as well. It seemed like you guys were really strong, and it almost seemed like Freddie, after he admitted to you that he'd cheated in the past.
I actually respected the fact that he told me up front. I didn't even want to have that conversation, obviously. That was a conversation that we got told to talk about. And I respected his decision, but I think he felt that I was holding this grudge towards him that she really doesn't like, and which was not, and he knew this, because off camera we had many conversations where I was like, thank you for owning up, like, we can just move on from this. But if anything, I think he just felt guilty the whole entire time, and he put that on me, which is fine, but yeah, there's obviously a lot that people don't see. So for viewers who don't know, Love is Blind is where you go and seek love and romance, but you don't see who you're speaking to, right? No. So, Jake, why did you go on the show?
My parents actually met in a very similar way. So my stepdad was texting my mum. He'd basically stolen the number off of a friend because the friend had met my mum in Blackpool, and they were texting for like 6 months. They'd never met. So that premise of how they got together and the marriage that they had was stunning. And to build a relationship not based on looks before you met, I just found that just incredible. So do you believe in that concept? Is it lust or love at first sight? It's weird. It's a bit of both. I think, it's definitely a bit of both. And I always say, as you get older, your looks will change, but your personality will stay the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Court cases.
A presidential dropout.
Assassination attempts.
This has been a US election like no other.
And if the polls are correct, it's on a knife edge.
On Tuesday night, stay up with us as the drama unfolds and America decides their next president.
We'll discuss what it means for them, for the world, and for our special relationship. America Decides, Tuesday night from 11
only on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. A week is always a long time in politics, but it's been another busy one in Westminster, from the budget to Badenoch. I'm going to be speaking to the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, and asking him what he makes of all the backlash against Labour's first budget. I'll also be joined by Julia Lopez, Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, who was a driving force in the campaign that propelled Kemi Badenoch to victory over Robert Jenrick yesterday. I'm also going to be joined by former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, who will be sharing his thoughts on what his successor, Rachel Reeves, announced on Wednesday. Will it prove to be as catastrophic as his own mini-budget, or even worse? And ahead of the presidential elections next week, we'll be speaking to Sir Conor Burns, former trade envoy to the US for regional trade and investment. We've got, once again, 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead, so don't go anywhere. Right, let's get stuck into the Sunday papers. This morning, I'm delighted to be joined by James Heal, who's the Spectator's political correspondent. James, lovely to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. OK, let's talk about the coronation of Queen Kemi, the new Conservative leader. It's the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. And even The Observer has managed to write something quite nice. People in Henley apparently welcoming her as Rishi Sunak's successor. What do you think?
Well, yes, this is the news, of course, that she won yesterday, 57 to 43% of the vote. And The Observer's gone to Henley, which was previously Tory from 1906 onwards, elected a succession of big beasts, including Michael Heseltine and one Boris Johnson. Yeah. And they've spoken to a lot of people, I have to say most of them over the age of 60, but they very are supportive of her candidacy, about her as leader. And they're saying they could win her back, because, of course, that seat's gone Lib Dem. And there are a whole bunch of seats in the south east and south west of this country that have always been Tory and yet went Lib Dem this time. And the Conservatives want to win power in 5 years' time. They need to win them back now.
Now, the Spectator used to employ Kemi. I think she was the digital editor. So what do your colleagues say about her? I know she's probably well known to quite a few of you.
Well, so she left about 4 or 5 years before I joined, but I think that she's always someone who was respected in the office and someone who was able to clearly going to be on the way up. And I think Fraser Nelson, my former editor, has spoken to the biography about her, that she was talking about how she was willing to take maternity leave and wasn't going to be paid for that when she was there. So I think she was someone who was respected in the Spectator when she was here 4 or 5 years ago.
And Robert Jenrick, should we have a word about his campaign?
Yes.
I mean, it was a strong campaign. And to be fair to him, he worked very hard. He was travelling the length and breadth of the country. I think there's a video that's gone viral of Mrs Jenrick, who seems to be a formidable force behind her husband. One wonders how they are both commiserating this morning.
Absolutely. I think she was very much the force of nature behind him. And I think that, he ran a very good campaign at times. It's just, unfortunately for him, it was a marathon, not a sprint. And I think whereas among the MPs, there was a lot of momentum behind him in July, August, when it got to the conference, he then sort of misstumbled a bit and he never really made it up. And you saw that steady drumbeat of names coming out for Kemi Badenoch. There was just nothing that really was able to turn it around. And of course, I think perhaps one of the key moments was when we had that GB News poll. And at the end of it, Christopher Hope said, who would here vote for Kemi Badenoch? And almost all the hands in the room went up. And I think that was one of those moments, a bit like 2005.
She did well in the debate, actually, to be fair. And she spoke second and therefore she was fresh in the memory. But she seemed a bit more natural than Jenrick, who seemed a bit over-rehearsed.
Yes, and I think that's a bit like Joe and Cameron in 2005, the Newsnight bit, where all the hands went up and that kind of really sealed the deal for him.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that was key.
All right, well, more interesting times ahead at Prime Minister's Questions anyway, I think we can both agree. Budget backlash. Well, the front page of the Sunday Telegraph reports that Labour MPs are particularly angry. I mean, we can expect the right to be angry with some of the measures that Rachel Reeves introduced on Wednesday. We've got 40 billion in taxes and then 72 billion in spending, which seems to me to be rather trust-like in its approach, and the markets have reacted accordingly. I'll be asking Kwasi Kwarteng for his reaction a bit later on in the show. But in general, I mean, Labour MPs are saying, how on earth do we sell this on the doorstep, which is an understandable concern.
Yes, I think the key killer line, of course, is that you've just hiked taxes by 40 billion. Why then are we seeing less growth over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah.
And Labour put so much stock in the Office of Budget Responsibility. They were going to live or die by the OBR. The OBR's come out and criticised them, and now, of course, Labour are stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to that, because on the one hand, they want to go out there and really trumpet this, but on the other hand, the OBR, the gospel by which they say they live or die, is saying quite another. So I do think that, as we see days 3, 4, 5, 6 of the budget and you see a week on, that's when a budget starts to unravel. And I think there's big questions, for instance, about those 100 or so seats which Labour won, were rural seats. And you've got agricultural relief now really coming to the fore as an issue.
Yeah, farmers are absolutely outraged. Funny enough, I saw a Tory MP who he was in a reduced majority up north. Martin Vickers was Cleethorpes, I can't remember what it's called now, but he was saying he had never received more posts from farmers in his life, and he's been an MP for many, many years.
And you know what, I was talking to another Tory MP who said, of course, they've got the big county council elections next year. This is the great boost they need. They were really worried about the reform threat, but they're now hoping we can campaign against Labour on this, frame it as a two-horse race, and they might be able to save some county councils.
I mean, is that slightly premature? We note the polling, which suggests that the Tories are now 1 point ahead of Labour on 29 versus 28. But it's far too early in the parliamentary cycle for the Tories to start thinking of a comeback. I mean, to be fair, Kemi Badenoch is still unpopular generally in the general public. She's got a lot of work to do to win over people's support.
Absolutely. I just think in the next sort of 6 to 10 months or so, when you're campaigning in those May ones next year, agricultural relief, the angry farmers is going to be a key thing for the Conservatives to win, to hang on to those county councils that they won in 2021 at the height of the Boris bounce.
Yeah, saying red wall, blue wall. It could be the green wall now that they need to win over. And I don't mean that in a kind of net zero sense. I mean it in a rural kind of wall where you'd have to wear your wellies. On that subject, Steve Reid criticised for wearing a £400 pair of wellies that were apparently given to him by Lord Ali. That's the Environment Secretary. Can't make it up. Too close to call the US election. We were just speaking about it off air. What do we think is going to happen? Because this key poll in Iowa by a pollster that you were saying is very renowned has put Kamala Harris 3 points ahead of Trump. That's a traditionally safe Republican state. So what's going on here, James?
Well, this is Ann Selzer, who's like a really respected pollster, has called most of the last 10 to 20 years of elections in Iowa right. Her poll has come out and most pollsters are giving it neck and neck. This, of course, gives a 3-point lead. Now, of course, Iowa only has 6 electoral college votes, but the key thing is, do those trends then map out to the rest of the Midwest in America, other places like Pennsylvania, for instance, as well, potentially? And so that's going to be the key thing to watch, really, is that have the Trump campaign somehow missed something that's happening in the Midwest, something the Harris campaign has got? And in an election where, of course, every pollster is unlikely to come out and sort of deviate from the herd too much, this is so striking because there's a respected pollster who's willing to go against the grain of conventional thinking.
Yeah, what's your instinct about it? I mean, we were speaking about it earlier. Last week I was sort of thinking, right, Trump's going to win this. Now I'm not so sure. I keep on vacillating between one and the other. Maybe, funnily enough, I'm flying out to America later and I'm going to be covering it next week for The Telegraph. If we have a situation where it's again on a knife edge, there's going to be big problems, isn't there, in the Capitol? I can see we covered in the paper last week premises already boarding up their windows and things. I mean, do you think we're going to see a repeat of January the 6th if it's very, very close and we're then left for days wondering who's won?
I feel we are, because there is a danger of how existential these contests become on both sides. You've got the left saying that he's a fascist, you've got the right saying that she's going to destroy America. And I was thinking about this. It's only been, I think, 12 years ago was the last time we saw a sort of presidential election which was fairly it wasn't particularly, it was very clear who was won and it wasn't a contested result. 2016, of course, with that Trump Clinton, then 2020 disaster, and then this one now. I very much fear for what's going to happen. I think the peaceful transfer of power is a benchmark for democracy. America has many wonderful things, but they have real issues. And I think there's a whole bunch of people in America, according to polls, who just look at that and think, I don't want to vote for either of these two clowns.
No. Well, also, I mean, it's been divisive enough, and they're both figures that I think the Americans are looking at and thinking, I don't really want either of them. But some of the rhetoric around it, you know, he's a fascist, he's like Hitler. Some of the rhetoric from the Trump camp, the comedian that made the point about Puerto Rico. It's like, I was speaking earlier on breakfast about this Dawn Butler thing. Actually, let's just have a very quick chat about that. So we've had this tweet. To be fair, she reposted somebody else's tweet accusing Kemi Badenoch of being a white supremacist in blackface. She then kind of unreposted it. There's now calls for her to have the wit removed from her. Why has politics descended into this grotesque unpleasantness?
I think it's because opponents reach for the most extreme hyperbolic example at the first instance. So I saw that tweet by Dawn Butler, Zara Sultana, now independent, formerly Labour, called it a victory for the far right. And
what's she talking? Literally, what's she talking about?
I've no idea. I mean, she said she was one of the most nasty and divisive people in politics. And I thought, well, you would know, Zara. But I mean,
no. But also, it's a mischaracterisation to suggest that Kemi Badenoch is that right wing. She's robust on woke and culture war issues. She was the one who was saying, "Hang on a minute, on the ECHR and migration caps, we need to just take a breath." She's not some ardent sort of. I don't understand that criticism.
And she's not. She was never one of the ERG Spartans, for instance.
No,
she was someone who's
she
on
was
the
a Brexiteer,
centre-right.
but you're right. She wasn't going over the top every time. Yeah.
So I think Labour are really struggling to paint her right now. And the first Labour attack ad about her misspelt the words government and waiting lists. So I think, they've got to really step up their game a bit. And actually, it takes a bit of time for a leader of the opposition, for the government to kind of work out how best to attack them. If you think about it, the Tories never really got Starmer down, did they? I mean, on one hand, they were like, he's weak. On the other hand, he's sinister.
Yeah.
And it can take a bit of time.
But this is why it's really difficult for Labour to manage Badenoch, because you're going to have the Dawn Butler response and the Zara Sultana sort of, well, she's a racist, even though she's a black woman from Nigeria. And then you've also got just Starmer himself, him at the dispatch box opposite her, I think is going to be interesting, not least because people will remember she made mincemeat of Angela Rayner a few weeks ago, and it was quite entertaining to watch. It's sort of Penny Mordaunt scenes in the House of Commons, withering attacks on Labour.
Can't wait for Wednesday.
Politics has at least got a little bit more interesting. Let's just segue into my former patch, the Royal Beat. We're calling it Battle Royal. And it's an investigation that's been carried out by the Insight team at Sunday Times and Channel 4 Dispatches. Channel 4 Dispatches love to do these deep dives into royal finances. To be fair, I mean, I've been reporting the royals since time in memoriam, and we've had this debate about duchy finances for quite some time. But what's the headline of what this investigation has revealed?
So really, it's because they've got more than 5,000 properties, and this is the most comprehensive look to date at the duchy's finances. And I suppose the top line being that they've got a number of public sector services which are paying millions of pounds to the duchy in terms of rent, particularly NHS hospital trusts.
Which is surprising.
Defence. Yes.
We knew that the duchy was run as a business. It affords both the King and the Prince of Wales their incomes. That income isn't subject to corporation tax, which has been a thorn in the side of the Republican movement for quite some time. But now this revelation that they're actually charging for public services does add a new dimension.
I think it does. And as I say, I'm in two minds about this. In the one sense that we obviously knew, as you say, a lot about this sort of duchy finances, but having this sheer comprehensive level of detail and the fact that obviously we talk about the royals as doing this public service, talking about them being almost synonymous with the state, obviously it's the head of state, etc. I think there will potentially be a backlash for this. And of course, it's the worst possible time for Prince William because it comes in the week of his Earthshot Prize and how he's doing a huge amount on homelessness, etc.
I actually have always felt it's a gift to the anti-monarchy movement to not be paying the conventional taxes that anyone else pays, including inheritance tax. I think it's an error, and I think as they continue to modernise, we've had the King talking about handing properties back to the nation, this idea that he needs to live in 5 different homes, Sandringham, Balmoral, blah, 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 blah. And I think this tax thing is actually their Achilles heel that keeps on coming back to bite them. It's not going to go away.
And of course, the Queen later, decided to start paying income tax in the early 1990s. I think something similar like that. Potentially.
Well, that gained them a lot of popularity and credit. I mean, if we're all suffering from higher taxes after the budget, it's the least the royals can do to shoulder their share of the burden.
Well, at least they'd be working people.
Well, are they? Let's discuss. And then also, you mentioned the late Queen Elizabeth II. Should we be changing the name of honours and such like from being called the Order of the British Empire? Empire's a dirty word now, James. You'll be familiar with that. And should we be calling it instead Order of British Excellence or even Order of Britain and Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, I think obviously the late Queen was a fantastic symbol of the nation for 70 years. But, I mean, Order of Britain and Elizabeth, I mean, the monarchy, of course, is bigger than one person, which is why we've managed to abdicate one in 1936 and why we've been able to withstand all the different ups and downs of the royal family themselves over the past 100 years and before that. So I'm not sure about the Order of Britain and Elizabeth idea. Order of British Excellence, there seems to be more to command that, I'd suggest.
And instead of calling it a commander of the British Empire, is it right? Companion of the British Empire sounds to be a bit less sexist. I mean, the point is, if you start taking empire off the name OBE, then you're basically admitting that there's something regrettable about the word empire.
And, of course, whom it applies to, because we do have still, I think, 15 overseas territories, which David Lammy hasn't all bathed away just yet.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
I mean, there's a sort of wide... It's not just the UK, as it were.
Indeed so. James Heal, thank you very much indeed. You're staying with me because we're going to do a panel a little later to analyse Badenoch's future in the Conservative Party and also the budget again. And again, look forward to the US elections, which are on Tuesday night. But coming up next, we hope to be speaking to Treasury Minister James Murray to find out what he makes about the backlash against the budget among his own Labour colleagues. Stay tuned. Be back in 2.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
What about train Wi-Fi? The Times. It's so funny the Times did this story because I was on the train yesterday trying to do some work and connecting to the Wi-Fi, and it happens all the time. It just doesn't work. It's pathetic. And then I opened the Times and they've done a massive investigation. Loads of different rail routes from north to south.
Was that the James Bond thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. What's
I think, well, that passenger got through, or almost got through, one episode one James Bond movie in 8 hours.
But you know, it's interesting. We call it train Wi-Fi, but it isn't. It's just really a SIM card on a train, really. So if your own phone's not going to get signal, why would we assume that the train's going to have signal? It just doesn't work like that. Unless you're in Japan or South Korea, whose infrastructure is infinitely better than ours, you're just not going to get signal. You have to download those films way before you get on
There is technology that can help with that. You know, there really is. If they found ways to put it underground, they can get it on ground and get you going. I definitely think, you know, with the price that we're paying for these tickets, they can get the Wi-Fi going. There is technology.
That's why it's so frustrating, isn't
Call
it?
Elon, get a Starlink. Let's go.
If you're a passenger paying hundreds of pounds for a season ticket or whatever you call it, and you know, commute to work every single day, and you're paying all this money, and you can't.
It's so expensive. You'd expect Wi-Fi at the basic. Yeah, exactly.
But it happens with phone signal as well. I'll be walking down London in Park Lane or somewhere else, or down on the south coast. I just don't have phone signal, and I think to myself, what on earth is going on?
Doesn't it feel like 5G's made it worse, though?
Yeah.
Because I feel like 4G, that didn't happen so much, but 5G just feels like...
Yeah, and then I always get this little E in the top corner of my phone, and I don't get any signal. I think it's got worse over the past couple of years. Yeah, especially with 5G. I agree with that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm joined now by James Murray, who's the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury and the MP for Ealing North. Minister, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for your time on a Sunday. So the Office for Budget Responsibility says that 60% of the national insurance hike will be passed on to working people. So you have taxed working people. You did lie in your manifesto.
No, in our manifesto, we were very clear that we wouldn't increase taxes on working people. And if working people look at their pay slips that they get after this budget, they won't see any increase in income tax or national insurance. To address specifically the point around employers' national insurance, you know, we're not denying the fact that the change to employers' national insurance will have consequences. It was a very difficult decision, probably the most tough decision we took in the budget package overall, but it's essential to make sure we fix the foundations to fix the public finances, because that economic stability is crucial for growth.
So you're just excusing it on the basis of different wording. You've said that you're not putting up income tax or VAT or national insurance on actual employees, but the OBR says that 60% of the costs will be passed on to workers and consumers via lower wages and higher prices. So can we please agree that you have indirectly ended up taxing working people?
No, because the taxes on working people are not going up. Taxes on pay slips, national insurance and income tax
Indirectly,
will not be
you
going
are
up.
adversely affecting working people. Please, Mr. Murray, please don't insult the audience. If the OBR is saying that 60% of these costs are being passed on to working people are being indirectly adversely affected by this budget. And Rachel Reeves herself called a national insurance employer's rate hike in 2021. She called it a jobs tax. She said it takes money out of people's pockets. So what's changed between 2021 and 2024?
Well, I'll tell you what's changed since we won the election, which is that we discovered the £22 billion black hole in the public finances, which the previous government concealed from the public, from the OBR, from the Office of Budget Responsibility. That pressure on public finances is something that we have to deal with. And we could have taken a decision after winning the election to sweep it under the carpet, to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't there. But we were absolutely determined to use this first budget of our new government to fix the public finances and to get stability back in the economy.
How on earth do you fix the public finances with £72 billion in spending?
The way that we fix the public finances is by setting out our two clear fiscal rules. Now, let me just tell you very briefly what they are. Number one, the stability rule says that day-to-day spending will be paid for through tax receipts. So no more borrowing for day-to-day spending like we had under the previous government. We will pay for what we spend on public services, live within our means, and end to borrowing for day-to-day spending. The second rule, the investment rule, is about getting debt falling as a proportion of our economy, whilst boosting long-term sustainable investment. And actually, that's what people need for the future. And that's what businesses want as well. Businesses want us to invest in the future and provide a stable outlet.
Minister, forgive me, but you're acting as if this budget has sort of justifiably gone down well with the public and businesses and other bodies. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation says that families will be £770 poorer because of this budget. Let me just give you one example of many business owners who contacted the Telegraph last week. I run an SME with 72 employees. This charge on employers' NI has cost us £82,000 per annum from April 2025. This will mean no pay rise for staff, no recruitment and potentially jobs lost. How does this protect workers and stimulate growth? We know it's not going to stimulate growth because the OBR has downgraded growth by 0.7% across the next 5 years. So this budget's been a disaster, hasn't it?
No, what this budget set out to do is to meet the very first promise we made in our manifesto, which is to deliver economic stability. Now, we've got to do that in order to get the public finances back on a firm footing, to give businesses the confidence to invest and to set the country in a better direction. That is what this budget did. And look, I'm not denying there were some really tough choices, difficult decisions. We've talked about decisions on tax. There's also decisions on spending and welfare. Difficult decisions to get the public finances on a firm footing, but it's absolutely essential to do that, to make sure that we can get that growth in the long run and to make sure businesses have the confidence to invest.
Well, one decision you made was to give public sector workers a pay rise, even though they represent just 17% of all employees in this country. The vast majority are in the private sector, which all of the organisations that have analysed the budget agree will be worse off because of it. Let's turn to farmers. The decision to put inheritance tax at 20% on farms worth over 1 million. Now, maybe if you're on the left, you think that only affects a minority because there's this misconception that all farmers are as rich as Croesus. In fact, 70,000 farms in the UK are going to be affected. We've now got huge concerns that it will affect food supply. So, on reflection, wasn't that a mistake and won't you have to reverse that policy?
No, look, I understand that people who own farms or run farms want to understand the detail of this policy, and I'm actually glad to have the opportunity to set out some of the detail of it, because you mentioned the £1 million relief from the agricultural property relief that you mentioned, but let me just set this out how this works. So the existing features of the inheritance tax system still apply. So the nil rate bands that people get, the nil rate bands on residence, obviously the transfer between spouses, the rules on 7 years gifting before people pass away, things not being subject to inheritance tax, all of that still applies. And what this means in practice is that in most cases, if you have a couple who are passing on a farm to the next generation, they will get £2 or £3 million, which is not subject to inheritance tax. So above that £2 or £3 million, so paying no inheritance tax on that first £2 or £3 million, above that, the rate will be half what it is for everyone else. It'll only be 20% rather than 40%.
I get all of the figures.
And
I completely get the figures, Minister.
So one final thing.
But the farming community is saying that this is a catastrophic... I know, but we can have all of your justifications. With the greatest respect, have you ever been a farmer?
I haven't been a farmer, no. But
no, so shouldn't we gauge the reaction of farmers above the reaction of a Treasury Minister as to how catastrophic this is for the agricultural sector? We've also heard from people who work for care homes and hospices. Hospices, Minister. These are institutions that care for people at the end of life, saying that they're going to be struggling with the increase in employers' NICs.
But if I can just go back to your point around farmers and farms and agricultural...
Well, can you actually... You've made a point about farmers. Could you address the hospice point, please, quickly, because we've only got a minute left.
OK, well, the point around employers' national insurance is that when you look at things like GPs, dentists, the care sector and so on, they will all be funded, obviously, through the settlements that we set out in terms of public spending. So the employers' national insurance increase doesn't kick in until April next year. And one of the reasons why we've taken up...
It's going to put staffing costs up for hospices and care homes.
Well, one of the reasons why we took the tough decision around employers' national insurance is to provide that funding for public services. And obviously the NHS got a very positive settlement at the budget, and the Health Secretary will set out the allocations of that money in due course.
All right, Mr Murray, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time, but thank you very much indeed for addressing our concerns this morning. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Julia Lopez. Ask her what she makes of the Ofcom decision to fine GB News £100,000. Stay tuned for that.
You could win Christmas on us this year. There's cash, £20,025 in tax-free cash to make your new year go with a bang. There's also £5,000 to spend on all the gifts. We've also got Christmas lunch for you, with £500 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. And finally, a festive GB News goodie bag. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recruiters are warning that if you're not tech savvy, you could be missing out with your CV failing to make it through an AI-powered sifting process. So we've gone from sort of computer says no HR people ticking boxes to AI, right? Is that right?
Yes, well, this applies once you're in the job as well, as a recent report revealed that employees expect AI will manage an average of a third of their tasks within the next 12 months. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Cosmo Curry, founder of Van Kuysen, a leading company in technology recruitment.
Morning, Cosmo.
Morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Ben.
Well, yeah,
Hi.
thank you for joining us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because AI is, of course, on the rise, and now in the workplace and in universities and things. Another article came to mind. There was a student recently, I think it was in the news just the other day, that got in trouble for using AI. So there's, you know, for exam purposes and essays. So there's lots of different ways that it can be a good thing and a bad thing. But you're, of course, here to talk about the ways in which AI is a good thing within the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is here to stay, for sure. And we're seeing this rise of people using it in such a clever format. And the other side of it is also we're seeing people who are using it and during the process of that, they are losing their character. We're losing the actual insight into the individual behind that. And so we've kind of got this kind of mix. And I think AI is phenomenal when you're looking at it from a point of view of optimization, point of view of speed, getting results. But I think we have to remember that, you know, the fundamental of recruitment is people. And we cannot substitute the people, the personal aspect, by replacing that with AI.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined in the studio by the Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Julia Lopez, and former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. But first, here's the news with Katie Bowen.
Camilla, thank you. A very good morning to you. It's just gone 10 o'clock. Your top stories this hour. Following her victory in the Conservative Party leadership election yesterday, Kemi Badenoch has vowed to ensure a fresh start for the party ahead of announcing her shadow cabinet. Kemi Badenoch won more than 53,000 votes in the contest, while rival Robert Jenrick received 41,000. Mrs Badenoch is expected to name her shadow cabinet in the coming days, ahead of their first meeting on Tuesday, with former contenders Robert Jenrick, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Dame Priti Patel reportedly open to front-bench positions. Elsewhere, Labour MP Dawn Butler shared a social media post accusing Kemi Badenoch of representing white supremacy in blackface shortly before she was elected as the new Tory leader. The Brent East MP has since deleted the repost from her X profile. Neither Downing Street nor Dawn Butler have made any comment on the post. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has described a £500 million investment by a US firm into a UK research campus as a real show of confidence in what the government are doing to grow the economy. The investment by San Francisco-based developer Prologis, announced days after Labour's budget, which attracted criticism for what some called a low-growth attitude, will be used to expand Cambridge Biomedical Campus. The Chancellor said that the investment will have a real impact on patients in the UK.
The UK's got huge strengths in industries like life sciences, but this additional investment will mean that we can create more good jobs, paying decent wages, as well as developing here in the UK life-saving drugs. And that's incredibly exciting because that means patients in the UK having access to better quality medicines whilst also building our research capability.
A joint investigation from both Channel 4 and the Sunday Times has revealed the full details of the property estates owned by King Charles and Prince William. The investigation shows the vast array of commercial property the royal family has built up from the time of medieval monarchs. Their contracts with public bodies are said to include a £37 million agreement with the Ministry of Justice and an £11.4 million deal with Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust. A spokesman for the Duchy of Cornwall said that it was a private estate with a commercial imperative, while the Duchy of Lancaster said that their business complies with all relevant UK legislation and regulatory standards. It comes as Prince William travels to South Africa this week for his Earthshot Prize award ceremony. The prize is hoped to recognise environmental solutions to repair the planet. To the US, where there are now just 2 days to go until the election, and shock polling from a traditionally Republican Iowa has placed Democratic candidate Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump by 3 points. It comes as Kamala Harris appeared overnight in a comedy sketch on Saturday Night Live in New York, where comedian Maya Rudolph dressed as the current vice president. Polls elsewhere in states such as Pennsylvania and Michigan show that the two candidates are tied ahead of Election Day on Tuesday. A teenage boy has been charged with attempted murder after a 13-year-old girl suffered multiple stab injuries in East Yorkshire. She was stabbed on Friday morning and was known to her attackers, according to Humberside Police. 6 teenagers were initially arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after the girl was found at the side of the A63 in Hessel with life-threatening injuries, including lacerations to her neck, abdomen and chest and back. The victim remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital. It's understood that police investigating historical sex offence allegations against actor and comedian Russell Brand have handed a file of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. A statement from the Metropolitan Police late last night said that following an investigation by Channel 4's dispatches and the Sunday Times in September 2023, the Met received a number of reports of sexual offences between 2006 and 2013 from women in London and elsewhere in the country. A file has now been handed to the CPS for their consideration. Brand has denied the allegations against him and said his relationships were always consensual. Those are your latest GB News headlines. Now, it's back to Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Katie. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Julia Lopez. Will she still stand by the remarks that she made about Kemi as leader, that she can change the party from top to bottom? I'll be speaking to her about that momentarily. Also going to be speaking to the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. He'll be here to share his thoughts on Rachel Reeves' bombshell tax-raising budget. And James Heal will be back with Aubrey Allegretti for their take on, well, the budget, the US elections, Kemi Badenoch. We're just going to have an all-round political chat. And I'm going to be joined by the former UK trade envoy for the USA, Sir Conor Burns, before I head out to America myself for the presidential election this week. But first, I'm joined now by one of the driving forces in the Kemi Badenoch campaign, Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Julia Lopez, who's also the MP for Hornchurch and Upminster. Lovely to see you today. So you must be cock-a-hoop that your girl won.
Well, I think it's taking a little while for it to sink in, to be honest with you, Camilla. It's been a long campaign, I think pretty much a third of the year.
Yes.
But also we ran Kemi's campaign in 2022. So many moments that you think back on over the last couple of years. And for us, it's a big deal. And we have a big challenge ahead, and we humbly accept the challenge and hope that we can make the difference we hope we can.
So when you said on GB News recently that Kemi is trying to launch a whole movement to change the party from top to bottom, what in your mind needs to change?
Well, look, I mean, we've just lost 2/3 of our MPs. And that is something that comes to us very physically every time we vote in the House of Commons. And that is effectively a representation of the trust that we have lost as a party amongst the British public. And we have to find a way to rebuild that trust with our voters and to show them that we have a programme ahead that can change the country and its direction in the way that I think so many people hope that it will go. I think people are very worried out there about what this Labour government means, and they are looking to us to be much better, more authentic Conservatives, more principles and values-based. And I think Kemi has a programme that she wants to rebuild the party with those values at its heart.
I mean, there's been some hint at changes around net zero pledges, arbitrary targets for the disposal of petrol and diesel cars. I think she also wants to rip up the renters' reform bill. I mean, are these approaches that you would support? Can she unify the party around those sorts of changes?
Well, look, we're not at a situation yet where we're going to have a detailed policy prospectus. I think, we are 4 years out from a general election. What we need to do is to show that we share people's values, but also that we're going to do the heavy lifting of the sort of intellectual changes required to have policies that actually stack up. So I would imagine we will start seeing things like policy commissions where we go out to businesses, to thinkers, to people in our communities and try and understand where policy needs to go before we start laying out a detailed policy prescription.
Although it kind of speaks to the confusion at the heart of Tory politics, that you aren't clear on what your should vision be as Conservatives anyway. I mean, if Conservatives lost their way so much that they don't know that they need to stand up for low taxes, a small state, probably a cap on immigration, a rethinking of the ECHR, a cancellation, pardon the pun, of some of these woke policies that seem to have infected British life. I mean, it can't be that difficult to work out where it went wrong. You had a load of manifesto pledges that you breached.
Well, I think we have to deal with a number of very significant events in our time in office that made us go against our fundamental instincts. I mean, COVID, for an obvious example, we had to spend huge sums of money, and we had to put the public finances in a situation we didn't want to. And that led to a lot of fissures in our party internally, because we didn't know what the right approach to take was to that very big public policy challenge. And I think it's left us in a place that we didn't feel we could authentically tell the electorate that we are low-tax Conservatives. So that's just one example.
But can Kemi definitely unite the party? I mean, people have tried and failed in the past, right? Is she going to be able to persuade the likes of generic supporters like, for instance, Mark Francois or Danny Kruger, who very much liked the cut of Jenrich's jib when it came to the ECHR? He put it out there. He said it should be a leave and remain thing. Observers might look at that and think, well, that's only going to serve to be more divisive than unifying. But is she able to bring this party together? Because she hasn't exactly got a reputation for being conciliatory.
Well, I think she can. I mean, she said in her speech yesterday that actually there's not very much that divides her and Rob. They agree on a lot of things. Actually, what was the point of disagreement in this leadership contest was whether we set out a detailed policy manifesto at this point in the political cycle, or whether we start to have a deeper exercise whereby we restate our values, a small state, the importance of family, equality before the law, and then start to build a policy perspective over a longer period of time around those values. I think that was the fundamental disagreement.
Sure. You know Kemi very well personally. I just wanted to ask you about this Dawn Butler retweeting of this post on X, which suggested that Kemi Badenoch was a white supremacist in blackface. First of all, what's your reaction to that? Should action be taken against Dawn Butler? I appreciate that she unreposted her repost.
That's really nasty stuff. It's the kind of vicious racial politics that I think is the kind of thing that Kemi pushes very hard against, and I think she represents a lot of people when she does so, because people are sick of being told that they don't fit into a particular demographic perfection because they have taken a different opinion to a left-wing commentator on racial issues. Kemi is very vigorously against identity politics. And I think that kind of approach from Dawn Butler is absolutely not on.
But should Butler lose the whip over this?
Well, that's for Keir Starmer to decide.
But what's your view? I mean, I just think there's a bit of double standards going on. I mentioned it earlier on breakfast. If anyone on the right had made a comment like this, there would be left-wing calls for their resignation within the minute. We have reached out to Dawn Butler, by the way, and Labour to get them to respond to us talking about this on today's show. But shouldn't she be disciplined in some way?
Well, Camilla, for me, I think it speaks to the fundamental difference of approach when it comes to race between left and right. We are now onto our fourth woman leader, our third ethnic minority leader, if you include Disraeli. And, we are a meritocratic society that welcomes people from all backgrounds. Labour sees somebody like Kemi being elevated and sees that as a challenge to their way of thinking. Let Dawn Butler tweet that stuff and let everybody see what they actually stand for.
What was your reaction to Ofcom fining this great news channel, GB News, 100 grand over their audience participation panel with Rishi Sunak? That happened during the election campaign. People here were baffled because Question Time on BBC did exactly the same back in the day in 2005, I believe at the time, between David Davis and David Cameron. Meanwhile, we have a situation where Ofcom doesn't seem too concerned when Ed Balls, the former Labour Chancellor, is on Good Morning Britain interviewing his own wife, Yvette Cooper, as Home Secretary. Have we got double standards going on here, Julia?
Well, I think Ofcom has to be very mindful of how its rulings are perceived by the public. I think one of the big challenges that we have as a society is people losing trust in mainstream media. There is an appetite for outlets like GB News, and those judgments from Ofcom need to be seen to be impartial. And I think, as you pointed out, there are some examples where that doesn't always seem to be the case.
So you're questioning Ofcom's impartiality on this particular issue, GB News?
Well, I haven't actually read the judgment myself. So, I mean, it may be that they found breaches in some areas and not others. I'm not going to comment on something if I haven't read it.
OK. But let me put it differently. Would it strike you as a good idea, in light of this ruling, for Ofcom to investigate Ed Balls interviewing his own wife on political policy on a morning breakfast show?
Well, yeah, I'm a GMB viewer myself, and I often sit and watch and feel that there is some interesting approaches that they take in relation to that particular political relationship. I don't think that a lot of their viewers are necessarily aware of that relationship. So,
So it might merit further scrutiny. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, I think, if there are complaints that have been made to Ofcom, those complaints are to be investigated.
Final question. When do you think Kemi's going to assemble her shadow cabinet, and do you hope to be in it?
I have no expectations of what my role might be. My priority is to be part of the team that changes our approach to politics and rebuilds trust amongst the public. She will be having her shadow cabinet meet, hopefully for the first time on Tuesday.
Oh, it's going to be that soon?
I believe so. And so, I'm sure we don't have to wait too long before we understand who's going to be in it.
It's going to be a big news week next week then. Julia Lopez, thank you so much for joining me in the GB News studio. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Camilla.
you very much. Well, in just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Kwasi Kwarteng. Has this mini budget made waves as his previously did back in 2022? Also going to ask him for his reaction to that Dawn Butler repost. Back in 2, don't go anywhere.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year, the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French. Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. Kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops, which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low.
And it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered down grapes and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm delighted to be joined now by the former Chancellor... Oh, I need to put my teeth in. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's not always easy to say that. Kwasi Kwarteng. Lovely to see you, Kwasi.
Very good to see
Thank you very much for coming in. So you've written a Telegraph article today which is headlined, "My budget was not perfect, but this one is a Marxist nightmare." First of all, get off the fence. Tell us what you really think. But hang on a minute. Are you saying this budget is really worse than your mini budget?
What I'm saying is that if you look at what they've done last week, they've essentially put up taxes on capital, on wealth creators, on investors, on farmers, on business owners, the lot. And if you keep doing that, you're going to crush growth in this economy. And in the end, they'll come up for taxes for ordinary working people. That's the risk in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think it's a much worse risk, actually, than the budget I was trying to introduce, Liz Truss and I were trying to introduce, which was trying to kickstart growth. This is an anti-growth budget, and I think will have very serious consequences.
I mean, I said all this to Treasury Minister James Murray earlier, and his retort was, well, we've got a 22 billion black hole. This is the legacy we inherited.
So the OBR said that the black hole wasn't 22 billion, and they're pretty objective. There were a couple of items where where the government didn't say how much they were going to compensate the post office scandal and post office masters, and so that was an open commitment, which this government have fulfilled. They put 1.8 billion, and there were a couple of other uncosted liabilities, but it was nowhere near the 22 billion. But I'll say a couple of things about that. The 22 billion was exacerbated by the fact that immediately they came in, they did a deal with the unions, which put up pay way beyond inflation. And of course, that bakes in higher costs. And in order to pay for those higher costs, they took away the winter fuel payment, which no Conservative had contemplated. And then they came up with this budget last week, which increases taxes by 40 billion. And now I say in my piece that, the jury's still out. It could well be the case that they get growth in 2 years and everything's fine. But if for whatever reason they don't get that growth, they'll come back for more tax rises, which will have an even worse effect on our economy.
Lots to look forward to then. On the OBR, I can't quite work out where you and fellow Conservatives stand, because you're saying that, actually, they're quite fair, the OBR. It strikes me that you say that when you agree with them, but not if you disagree. We had Jeremy Hunt, your successor, saying last week that they lacked political impartiality. So which is it? Because actually, the OBR's verdict of this budget is pretty withering, isn't it?
So that was the point we're making. We're saying that the OBR, which is not pro-Conservative, as Jeremy said, as I believe, is actually criticising this government. That shows how bad it is.
Yes.
Because their natural inclination actually is to do more tax.
So you do think that they are politically partial towards Labour? They're favourable towards Labour rather than Conservative?
I think their mindset, I don't think they wake up in the morning thinking, how are we going to...
cut taxes.
Well, no, they certainly don't think that, but they're not thinking, what can we do to support the Labour Party? But what they are thinking is very much along the same lines. Ideologically, I think, as the Labour Party, they basically say you've got to raise taxes to pay for spending, but they don't believe that reducing taxes necessarily grows the economy.
And what are we to make of the market reaction to this budget in comparison to your mini-budget?
So the issue that the mini-budget had, and I've spoken about this, is that it was introduced very quickly.
Yeah.
What Labour have done has been the opposite. They spent 4 months essentially trailing bits of the budget. So that means that when the actual budget is announced, there were no surprises. Everyone knew that they were going to raise taxes. They were even spinning beforehand.
Yes. The Speaker of the House of Commons was angry about
That's
it.
Right.
Lindsay Hoyle saying, why are you pitch rolling this stuff?
Yes, and we took a more old-fashioned approach and tried to introduce everything on the floor of the House.
Yeah.
But that's why they pitch roll. That's why governments essentially leak everything to pacify or to make sure the markets are fully informed, as it were.
But there's still been an adverse reaction, at least when it comes to these government bond yields. Just talk to us a bit about that. It's not reached trust levels, but what does that tell us about the market's reaction?
So it means that I don't think they believe, I don't think the market fundamentally believes the growth figures. I don't think they believe that growth is going to come. And if growth doesn't come, we're going to have more tax rises and more borrowing.
Yeah.
And I think what's going on with the gilts and the government bonds is very much reflecting a lack of belief in this government's ability to deliver growth.
And what's your view about what might happen to interest rates in the light of what was announced on Wednesday?
Well, it seems to me that, especially with the national insurance increases for employers, that may well have an inflationary effect. They'll pass through some of those costs to consumers. And as a result of that, I think interest rates are probably going to stay higher for a bit longer.
You had to
particularly with the gilts as well.
When the mini-budget backfired, you had to do a few reverse ferrets. How easy is that to do? Because it's now being suggested that particularly this IHT on farming land over 1 million is going to have to be reversed because it could actually affect food supply. It could close down farms.
I don't think they look through the consequences of it. And actually, you're right. I mean, I tried to abolish the 45p rate, and we reversed that. I reversed that. I was asked to reverse
How does that process happen?
So you essentially say the party wouldn't wear it. The MPs thought this was too much in favour of the rich, in inverted commas. I thought we were trying to incentivise, entrepreneurs. I still believe that. But it was too much for the party to swallow. And then, there's a sort of confab, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, people talk. And then you make the decision, right, we're going to reverse it. But once you start reversing things, that's where...
But it's a political decision rather than any external influences having anything to bear.
I think it's very
It would
political.
be for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and others to sit round and say, hang on a minute, have we made a mistake here?
Yeah, you've got to remember that the budgets are intensely political. Yes, they deal with fiscal policy and tax policy and all the rest of it. But the whole drama and optics around them are very, very political. And also you have to carry the budget through the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Now, in our case, we had a majority of 80, but there were lots of people who were the Red Wallers and others who were upset about the fact that we got rid of things like the cap on bankers' bonuses and the 45p rate. And there'll be Labour MPs similarly. Some of them in rural seats because they got such a big majority. They'll be representing rural seats.
Yeah.
They've never represented before. Who will be saying, look, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't do this.
What do you think is the biggest clanger in there? Because I put to James Murray this concern as well. So we've got the farmers' farrago, if I can call it that. Then we've also got this concern that this national insurance hike for employers, if you're NHS or in the public sector, you're exempt from it. But if you're providing care through a care home that's run privately or for a hospice that's a charitable endeavour, I think people misunderstand hospices and think that they're all government funded.
No, they're not.
They're not, OK? They largely receive between 10 to 20% government funding if they're lucky. So I happen to be involved in a hospice, the Peace Hospice in Watford, and I met with them in the week and they said, we're already struggling to recruit staff against NHS wages, which have gone up by 14%. And now we're going to have to endure, at a time when fundraising has gone down because of the cost of living crisis, a massive hike to our wage bill.
Yeah, I think the national insurance increase on employers was probably the worst element. That does most of the heavy lifting in terms of the 40 billion. I think they think that 25 of the 40 billion is going to come through increased national insurance contributions on the part of employers. But what that doesn't take into account, and again, our friends the OBR were good enough to point this out, is that the OBR estimate that 60% of that increase will be borne by working people in the form of consumers.
Yeah.
So if a company's making goods, they're going to increase the prices to cover the tax.
I mean, I put this to the Treasury Minister. He was like, well, that doesn't mean that we're taxing working people.
Well,
they've lied about it.
They're ultimately going to have to bear the cost.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that they've lied in the manifesto?
Well, look, I think they've boxed themselves in.
They've misled.
Well, they've said we're not going to touch working people, but of course, and this is the point of my article.
Yeah.
Any attack on people who are employing people is an
attack on their employees.
Of course,
yeah, of course.
Of course. So.
Let's move away from money matters to leadership matters. Did you support Kemi Badenoch?
I was strictly impartial.
Why?
Because they're both very good candidates and they're both very good friends. No, seriously.
Get off the fence.
No, I was seriously torn. And I knew
but
that...
did you have are you a Tory member still?
Yeah.
You must have cast a vote. Come on, tell us.
I'm not going to say who I voted for.
All right.
But I did support, in a way, I wanted both of them to get into the final.
OK.
And I was very happy that both of them did.
And what's your reaction to Kemi?
I think it's an extraordinary result. I mean, we can talk about Dawn Butler a bit later.
Yeah, well, no, let's talk about her now.
No, I mean, she's got form on this.
Yes.
On a personal level, I've always got on with her, but her race baiting is completely crazy.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that if Kemi had lost, she'd have said exactly the same thing.
Yes.
She'd have said, oh, of course, Kemi lost because the Tories are racist and Britain is racist. Now that she's won, she's saying it was racist. I mean, this is insanity.
I mean, it's quite insane to accuse a black person of being a white supremacist.
But in their logic, they put everything through the prism of race baiting and divisiveness.
Well, if she's a race baiter, why has she still got the whip?
Look, that's up to Labour.
But what do you think, genuinely?
I genuinely think that, given what she said, she should have the whip removed from her. There should be some discipline and some disciplinary measure against this kind of really hateful divisiveness.
I was reminded by my producer in my ear of Rupa Huck when she said to
that's
you
right.
that
She said I wasn't black. Oh, she said to her...
No, you're superficially a black man.
Yeah, that's right.
And she, I think, was disciplined.
She was.
So the same should happen to Dawn Butler.
I think this is, in a way, what Dawn has said is worse, because she's accusing Kemi, unbelievably, of being a kind of front for white supremacy. I mean, that's literally what she's accusing
That's literally what she said. I mean, she's unreposted the repost, but the repost...
she's taken it down now.
She reposted it and then she regretted it and unreposted it. But the damage is done.
Yes, but you can see exactly how they think, because if Rob, let's say, had won, they would have said exactly the same thing. They'd have said this is white supremacy or whatever. So everything that happens, they try and put through the same channel, regardless of the circumstances,
I mean,
which I think is wrong.
I'm reluctant to ask you this because you've always, a bit like Kemi actually said, well, just treat me as a man. I don't need to be defined as a black man.
Yeah, all of that.
I'm a black politician. He's a black Tory. However, how hard is it to be a person of colour on the right these days?
I think it's in the old days, I'd say 20, 25 years ago, you did deal with old-fashioned, racists.
Yeah, out-and-out racism.
I think the problem now is for people like Dawn Butler.
Yeah.
Because they're going to call you coconut, they're going to call you all sorts of names. I mean, absurdly, they're accusing Kemi of being a white supremacist or a face for white supremacy. And they use incredibly offensive language, which, if anyone else used, they would be reprimanded. So the real threat, actually, the real people who use race relentlessly and ruthlessly are the extreme left.
I mean, is this going to be a problem for her as Tory leader moving forward? On one hand, being a strong black Nigerian British woman could pose problems for Keir Starmer just because he's less charismatic and dynamic and probably will struggle with her at the dispatch box. But could this kind of attack line from the left be problematic for her?
No, because I think most people...
Yeah.
You've got racists on one side and you've got crazy left-wing activists, race baiters on the other. I think the vast majority of people will take her on her merits. And if she does a good job, I think she's got a very good chance of getting elected.
I noted from your illustrious educational history...
You're not getting
because you were a high achiever, weren't you, at school, at Eton and beyond, and you got your double first from Cambridge, and then you headed out to Harvard.
That's right.
And so you know America and American politics very well.
I follow it very closely, yeah.
A quick prediction from you, Kwasi, on what
everyone
you think.
thinks Trump will win.
What do you think?
I think he probably will, but I'm just not as sure. Last week, I thought it was definitely a done deal for Donald. A couple of polls, I think there was an Iowa poll where Harris was up 3.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's true, then she's got a very good chance of getting in. But it's just one poll.
Will you be watching overnight? Are you that geeky?
100%.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much indeed for joining me on GB News once again. Lovely to see you. Well, coming up next, we're going to be joined by a panel to dissect what the former Chancellor has just said and give their reaction to the new Tory leader, discuss the budget, a little bit of US politics on top. Lots still to stay tuned for, so don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good morning to you. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. High pressure is still in charge for this second half of the weekend, so it's generally keeping things on a calm note. Light winds for most of us. There's a bit of a breeze out towards the west at times, but stuck underneath this high pressure system remains quite a lot of cloud. So for many of us, it's going to be grey skies throughout much of the day. We could see the odd spot of drizzle in places, particularly around some western coastal districts or over the hills as well, quite misty and murky. There will be, though, some sunnier spots for the likes of northern Scotland, so here we'll see the best of the brightness during today. But for many of us, those temperatures will be around average for the time of year, between 12 and 14 degrees Celsius. As we head into this evening, if you do have any bonfire night celebrations tonight, it should stay largely dry, but again, I can't rule out the odd spot of drizzle to watch out for, particularly across those western areas. But otherwise, widespread blanket of cloud for much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Again, the best of those clearer spells overnight are going to be reserved for northern areas of Scotland, where you've got the best chance of seeing some starry skies. Because, though, the clear spells are here, this is where we'll see temperatures drop off a little bit more as we head into the second half of the night. So we could see a touch of patchy frost around first thing on Monday morning for northern Scotland, but elsewhere temperatures will be holding up more in single-figure marks generally. A little bit colder than where we have been over recent nights, but certainly 7 to 9 degrees Celsius for most. As we head into Monday, for many of us, it is a very similar picture with widespread grey skies and remaining fairly drab and gloomy. But a slight change in wind direction could provide a little bit more in the way of brightness to arrive into the far southeast, but also for the likes of Western Wales, Northern Ireland and parts of Western Scotland as well. May eventually see the sunshine poking through during the latter stages of the day. Temperatures again around that 12 to 14 degrees Celsius mark, but as we head into the middle part of the week, whilst the cloud is going to remain, temperatures should climb up a little bit more, a bit milder.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm rejoined now by James Heal, who cannot get enough of us this morning, and Chief Political Correspondent for The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. They're both sitting here on their phones. They're such little Westminster wonks. We were, what's going on today? Aubrey, you're here before you fly off for the US elections, so we'll talk a little bit about Trump and Harris in just a moment. I've already asked you, James, for your reaction to Kemi's appointment, so let's ask you, Aubrey, what's your thoughts on it all?
So, I mean, I think most people looking at this will think that Kemi Badenoch is a sort of safer pair of hands because she is somebody who served for longer in the cabinet. Robert Jenrick only got up to immigration minister level, so sort of attending cabinet. She is, of course, though, quite a divisive figure, and she suffers from the same thing that Liz Truss did, which was effectively winning without the sort of overwhelming support of MPs. And a sort of still, you know, not the biggest margin amongst members. So how she manages to kind of get all of those MPs on side will be really interesting. Now, during the race, it's clearly not been as bad as the blue on blue we saw in 22.
No.
And actually all of the candidates, as they've exited, have done so pretty gracefully and sought to really say, I'm getting very firmly behind you. But I think the fact that you had Bob Blackman having to change the no confidence rules suggests that he doesn't trust them, if you like, not to initiate one of those contests.
Let's just talk about that, James. So basically, it was 15% of MPs could trigger a no-confidence vote. It's gone up to 30%, or is it 33? 30.
I think it's about a third. So
about a third. Yeah. And that means that actually, instead of the current 18 MPs that would be needed to oust her with their letters of no confidence, it would now have to be 40. So that does change the dynamic of people saying, oh, well, she might be opposition leader, but she won't be a future Prime Minister. That would suggest that she goes the distance.
Well, I think haunting all of this is 2001. And, of course, 2001 is Ian Douglas-Smith gets through by one vote, gets through to the membership, then wins comfortably. And, of course, within 2 years, he was out of office. So this is obviously a move to try and bolster the new leader's position in Parliament. And I think everyone's very conscious of the fact that when we got down to the final ballot of MPs, James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick all almost were within 2 or 3 votes of each other. None of the people who got elected, you know, either if Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch had more than a third of the parliamentary party, really. I think Kemi had 34%, Rob would have had 33%. And everyone's very conscious of the fact that, you know, there is really a big split in the shadow cabinet and a big split in the rest of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and keeping that in line, because there are so few MPs, is going to be key, because there's only 121 people to work with.
How hard is it for this party, genuinely? I mean, they keep on saying unite or die. They've literally nearly died. I mean, they haven't got any choice now. Are we going to have this kind of... To be fair, the biggest critics of Badenoch versus Jenrick were people now outside. You know, your David Gawkes, your Gavin Barwells, your Anna Soubry's, who many regard, frankly, as Liberal Democrats in blue clothing. OK? But can this party unite around Badenoch?
Well, I mean, you had so many people before the election. I just couldn't believe the number of Tory MPs who were going, we need a period in opposition because it will focus minds. It will make us understand you know, what's at stake here and what we need to win, because they've completely lost that kind of discipline. So whether or not they actually use this period in opposition to do all of those things they said they would, have to sort of wait and see. But it is going to be really hard for them to come together. And obviously there is going to be appointments to the shadow cabinet, possibly later today. So how Kemi brings the people together and you know, who she gives those positions to is always fascinating in terms of who they're rewarding. Is it allies, or actually do you bring in some people who are prominent supporters, Robert Jenrick and others as well?
Good point. So first of all, first question then, is it a good idea for her, in the spirit of unity, to actually appoint every other leadership rival to the cabinet?
I think offering some of them, maybe not all of them, because of course that's 6 and that's about a third or a quarter of your shadow cabinet.
Yeah.
I think offering most of them a job would be worthwhile. Of course, James Cleverly's already said he's going to return to the backbenches, so that one's out. I suspect she'll offer something to Robert Jenrick, and I suspect he'd turn it down. Well, I think that's what normally happens when the second plus person would. I mean, Rishi got offered a job.
That's a classic example, isn't it? In the spirit of renewal, shouldn't Jenrick actually say, I'll do whatever you offer me, because he's been banging on about being the unity candidate.
Equally, he might feel the need to not serve in that shadow cabinet and instead want to sort of campaign on different issues on the backbenches.
Yeah.
Certainly, I do think that if he's not
lingering in the background, ready for a reassault on
Mrs. Jenrick, of course.
I think in 2019, Jeremy Hunt wasn't offered or didn't take up a job with Boris Johnson. You know, having moved from a very senior position in the previous government, they went head-to-head in the final 2. And either Jeremy Hunt was offered something that he didn't want to take or wasn't offered something. So there is precedent.
I do think, if not Jenrick himself, some of his more able backers, certainly. You know, Neil
Danny
O'Brien.
Kruger.
Neil O'Brien, certainly. I think someone's been really taking the fight to Labour on the last few weeks. And I think that's the key thing. When we talk about uniting, it doesn't have to be necessarily pro-Chem, it can be anti-Labour. I mean, a lot of the agenda...
That's the question. Should it just be now a kind of get in the people that can take the fight to Labour the most?
Yeah.
Should they be more worried about taking the fight to Labour than, for instance, taking the fight to Nigel Farage?
I think that's what you have to do in Parliament. Maybe in the country, what you do, therefore, is you get your poll ratings up to about 30%. You spend the next 2 years uniting behind something and strengthen the party, and then from there you can build on. That's what, Starmer did. Starmer, of course, was very successful leader of the opposition, took a really distraught party of less than 200 MPs and gave it a massive majority, doubled it overnight, and that's how he did. He spent the first 2 years focusing on his internal parliamentary party, strengthening himself in that, and then the next 2 years taking the fight to the Tories.
Should she do that?
Well, it's the J-curve theory, right, which is what Keir Starmer followed, which is things have to get worse before they get better, and you have to be prepared for a reckoning with your own party. You know, remember all the really awful headlines we had even after Keir Starmer became Prime Minister about the Equality and Human Rights Commission looking at institutional anti-Semitism, him kicking Jeremy Corbyn out of the party, suspending him. Sometimes you have to make those really tough decisions to sort of attract that negative publicity, to show people how much you've changed in order to then start going up the other side. Does she have the stomach for it? Do those around her, are they prepared to sort of get in line? Those are the questions that are going to face the next 2 years.
Fascinating stuff. So we think we could get some shadow cabinet appointments in Savo?
Potentially. I think before Tuesday is when we're expecting the shadow cabinet. So I think
stay tuned to GB News for that. And before you go, chaps, let's have a little chat about, very quickly, Aubrey, how bad is it for Labour? I mean, we can't judge the next 4 years on the last 4 weeks, can we?
No, I mean, we've got a very long time ahead of us, and I think opinion polls are slightly interesting, but they don't really tell us too much yet about how the country is going to fundamentally change. The next pinch point is the council elections in spring next year. That is where, speaking to Conservatives over the last few weeks, they say, we're really worried that we're going to get properly decimated again because they haven't had that sort of opportunity to rebuild. They've had this sort of medium-length leadership contest where they haven't had somebody to properly stand up and respond to the budget, under the new leader. Yes. And so there is a fear there that with reform really sort of strengthening its grassroots, local activists level, that they get really kind of, the screws are turned there.
Now, something else that might turn the screws is a Trump victory next week for Labour. How are Labour going to cope, briefly, James, with a Trump victory, bearing in mind everything that David Lammy and others have said about this bloke?
They're going to have to try and play up the strategic importance of it, really commit to that defence spending. But I think I'd be most worried about if I was in Labour is in the Treasury and what those tariffs, if Trump introduced them, are going to do to our economy and the rest of the world, because it could be a worse economic hit, economists suggest, than the worst bits of Brexit or COVID.
OK, so again, lots to look forward to.
On that cheery note.
Yeah, Aubrey, have a safe flight. I'll see you out there, no doubt. And thank you very much, James Heal, for staying to come back for the panel. Great to see you both. You can get back on your phones now. Coming up next, I'm going to be discussing the US elections a little more with former Tory MP and US trade envoy Sir Conor Burns. Back in just a jiffy. Don't go anywhere.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yes, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh,
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh, yeah, well, it's 7 years ago, actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Court cases.
A presidential dropout.
Assassination attempts.
This has been a US election like no other.
And if the polls are correct, it's on a knife edge.
On Tuesday night, stay up with us as the drama unfolds and America decides their next president.
We'll discuss what it means for them, for the world, and for our special relationship. America Decides, Tuesday night from 11.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Ahead of next week's presidential election, I'm joined now by the former Tory MP and trade envoy to the US for regional trade and investment, Sir Conor Burns. Sir Conor, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Tell me about the Kemi Badenoch you met 20 years ago, because I saw you put out a very affectionate tweet saying how impressed you were with her when you first met her. I think you were one of the earliest MPs to sort of tip her as a future leader. What was she like?
Yeah, I mean, look, this was before I was an MP and way, way before Kemi was an MP. I was involved in an organisation called Conservative Future, the youth wing of the party, and I was at a Christmas reception in East London. And this remarkable young lady arrived with denim jacket, huge hair. I had more hair in those days as well. And I was so taken with her, a little bit what you see now, the questioning, always wanting to know the reason why. Why do we do this? Couldn't we do this? Could we do this better? And I was so taken with her that I got in touch with the party chairman the following day and said, I met this remarkable young lady. You've got to get her in, get her on the candidates list. She's the future of the party. And I sort of followed her a bit after that. And then I didn't really see her again until she was elected to Parliament. And she came into the tea room, rushed up and hugged me and said, it's your fault. She's amazing. And I think she is going to be a breath of fresh air, not just to the Conservative Party, but to British politics. And I think not necessarily you, Camilla, but I think the media are going to have some getting used to her, because she actually just directly answers questions. You don't need two talking heads afterwards to work out what she meant, because she just tells it to you straight.
Although, is that directness sometimes going to land her in trouble? So, Conor, we have had criticisms made of her being too abrasive, maybe being too arrogant, not listening enough. I mean, she's going to have to be all ears to ideas, isn't she, as the Conservative Party tries to reconstitute itself?
I think, look, the thing about Kemi, and it is a little bit, I don't want to sort of labour the parallel, but it's a little bit like Margaret Thatcher. Because she knows her own mind, she will dismiss things that she just disagrees with. And she can be forthright. Look, I worked with her extremely closely when I was the trade envoy. In fact, she empowered me to go and do the negotiations on her behalf for the state-level trade agreements. We did the two with Florida and with Texas. She knows what she wants. She is single-minded in achieving that. But I absolutely agree that she will need to build a team around her, and she will have to be sensitive to the egos, of which there are many in politics, and even in an almost annihilated Conservative parliamentary party, the egos are still firmly in place. They will have to be managed, and I would suggest that the roles of Chief Whip, policy development, and party chairman will be very key for Kemi's success going forward.
Do you think that she needs to unite the party by appointing her leadership rivals to key posts?
Look, I think she needs to unite Conservatives. I think we've had too many, and you alluded to it a little bit in your previous segment. We've had too many people who chase the adulation of people who will never vote Conservative. People for whom I knew, some of them not that far away from me in Bournemouth, some of whom rejoiced in the tweets that said, oh, I really hate the Tories, but you're okay for a Tory. That's not how you win elections. I think Kemi will go back to those first principles, a state that works for people, and organise your tax and spend priorities around what are the priorities that British people need. And I think the Conservative Party became addicted to taking people's money off them, repackaging it, handing it out to them in little parcels of benefits and grants and so on, and then expecting through that to assemble an electoral coalition. That is the route to madness. If we go down that route again, we will always lose to those who are promising more than you can fiscally afford.
Talking about the finances, I thought I'd ask you about your reaction to the budget, because you were very critical of Liz Truss's mini budget. How do you think Rachel Reeves's offering on Wednesday compares?
Well, I tweeted slightly sarcastically ahead of the budget that there may be only one person in Britain eagerly looking forward to the budget, and that person could well be Liz Truss, because there would be a budget that would be even more damaging than hers. My criticism wasn't actually the content of the Liz Truss mini budget. My criticism was of Liz Truss's total failure to make the arguments, to prepare the ground, to roll the pitch ahead of that mini budget. It landed like an unexpected tsunami on the economic beaches of Britain. And I think this budget, I mean, look, Rachel Reeves knows what she's doing. You are going to prove again, I think, in the coming years that you cannot tax and spend and regulate your way to economic productivity, growth and prosperity. I think that the budget will be hugely damaging to the UK going forward. We do need something more in tune with, the lighter touch, competitive tax. Art Laffer needs to come and reteach British politicians the Laffer curve, that you can actually increase tax take sometimes by lowering the tax rate and incentivizing risk-taking and investment and so on. And by that, I mean real investment. Investment's one of those words that's been sort of misconstrued or colonized by the left to mean spending. Investment means something you put money into in order to get a return on it. I think the budget will be hugely damaging. And I think that the opportunity for a new Conservative leader is, firstly, and I think Kemi is right in this, rebuild trust. People have got to know where you're coming from, what you believe in, what your values are. Once they've established that, they might be prepared to listen to you. We're far too soon for detailed policies, but we need to set the narrative that tax, spend, state control, increased regulation is not the way to create prosperity, jobs, employment for the British people.
So, Conor, we've only got about 90 seconds left. I know you've recently been in America. What are your predictions for what might happen on Tuesday night?
I wish I knew. I'd follow the example of some people during the election and put some bets on. But look, America is profoundly divided right at every level of society. Every cab you get into, they've got strong opinions. It's fascinating to watch. You know, what you've got really, in essence, is you've got a Democrat nominee who probably would never have been nominated had she had to go through the normal process. She's only there because it became abundantly clear that President Biden was far from capable of seeing out, maybe not even this term, but certainly not a further term. You've got a very changed Republican Party that really is now around the personality of Donald Trump rather than the history of the Republican Party. And you've already on both sides, interestingly, got people talking about the next election after the one we're going to have on Tuesday and what that means when President Trump will either have lost or be term limited. It's going to be a roller coaster for the years ahead.
As a righty, very briefly, Sir Conor, would you rather see J.D. Vance running for president than Donald Trump?
I take a very simple view. We shouldn't interfere in other people's elections. I hope we get a president who understands the historic relationship between the UK and the US, how important we've been for global freedom, how integrated we are in defence and security, and what a force for good in partnership we are for the world.
Sir Conor Burns, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Sir Conor and all of my guests today. I will, of course, be back next week at 9:30. I'm going to America in the meantime, so I'll be filling you in on my travels. Up next, though, it's Michael Portillo. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning to you. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. High pressure is still in charge for this second half of the weekend, so it's generally keeping things on a calm note. Light winds for most of us. There's a bit of a breeze out towards the west at times, but stuck underneath this high pressure system remains quite a lot of cloud. So for many of us, it's going to be grey skies throughout much of the day. We could see the odd spot of drizzle in places, particularly around some western coastal districts or over the hills as well, quite misty and murky. There will be, though, some sunnier spots for the likes of northern Scotland, so here we'll see the best